and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where we explore the strange and unexplained. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, and thanks for joining me. Now, if you enjoy our content, then please subscribe, like, and share our presentations. Please feel free to place a comment as well. Super Chat is active during the show, so please show your support for Phantoms and Monsters Radio by clicking the dollar icon underneath the chat. You can also support us by clicking super thanks icon or buy me a coffee link as well. Your consideration is very much needed and appreciated. So my guest tonight is Mr. Sam Shearon, who is a British dark artist and specializes in horror and science fiction. His work often includes elements inspired by vintage tales of monsters, madmen, dark figures, post-apocalyptic genres, including cyberpunk and industrial wastelands, and classic literature. Sam's main influence stemmed from ancient cultures, the occult, industrial art revolution eras, the supernatural, the paranormal, cryptozoology, and the unexplained. Sam has created covers for comic books and graphic novels, as well as album sleeve artwork and merchandise designs for some of the biggest names in rock, metal, and industrial music. Sam is also known for his cryptozoology art in the form of book covers, prints, and magazines. You can find and purchase Sam's artwork at MrSamShearon.com. So, Sam, thanks for coming on the show tonight. And I don't think we have him in here yet. So we're going to have to wing this for a bit. Anyway, I guess we're trying to get him. He's coming. Anyway. And I was late getting here too. I popped in here about 5 minutes before and I fell asleep, and so I know what it feels like. Anyway, I know Vincent was flipping out. I heard the phone ring and I was too busy trying to get ready. So I'm watching him now, trying to get him in. 1 minute. Okay, I get you. So there he is. Hey. Hey, Sam, how you doing?
Good evening. I made it. How you doing, Lon?
I don't know.
We're doing a little preemptive mic check.
What's going on here?
Okay.
Sam, you can hear me. I'm going to bring you back in here in just a second. I think you're running a little hot. I'm going to fix it out for you real quick.
Oh, you got to love live radio. Yeah, there you go.
I'm back. Well, that's good. Better than cold.
Well, Sam, I didn't realize how many different music artists and so forth you have done artwork for. Can you kind of list some of the people and some of the folks and groups that you've worked for? And I lost him again. I can't hear you, Sam. Oh, there you are.
I'm back.
Yeah, you are. So whatever you said, say it again.
Yeah, I was just saying it's good to meet you. It's been too long. Who have I worked with? Wow, that is a list we could go on for a while with. I've done a lot of artwork for bands and musicians, solo artists, and majorly rock and metal groups.
Right.
But they include Rob Zombie and Slayer and Rammstein, Iron Maiden, Filter, Jason Charles Miller, who's formerly of Godhead, American Head Charge, Ministry. I mean, him, Paramount 5000, so many. It just goes on and on. But I've also done a lot of comic books. And of course, I've directed animations for Clive Barker and for Stan Lee's company. And I've done cover artworks for the X-Files. I mean, yeah, I've sort of had my fingers in a lot of pies over the last 10 years.
You got. Come on, Vincent.
Hey, Ron, I think it's actually your mic coming in hot.
What?
Sounds fine to me. Live radio.
Yeah. I'm not sure where the interference is coming in.
Could be anywhere.
But there's a reverb and I'm gonna try to put you guys out one at a time.
Okay. How about now? I know it's delayed.
Let's see.
Test. Yeah, every time you bring Sam in, it gets messed up.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly that is. You can hear me fine, and every time I bring Sam in, for some reason it's crossing. Sam, I know you can hear us right now. If there's any way you can unplug your mic and plug it back in, and then I'll bring you back in. I think there's something weird going on with the mic and kind of making a feed loop. So we'll see if that works. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Live radio. Sam, are you still here?
Let's start it. Vincent.
He's gone.
Vincent.
Vincent, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's Sam. It's Sam's mic for sure. I don't know how to fix the issue here because I can hear you. You can hear me fine. Every time I undo his mic, the feedback loop starts. I'm not sure what that is. I haven't come across this yet. So bear with me. So he.
It's funny because I don't have this open anywhere else.
We're gonna have to. It's ditches for now. We're not gonna do this. We're not gonna be able to do this.
Yeah, I don't know with that, Sam. I'm so sorry. Unless there was a different way to set, like, could you go micless? Could you pull the mic and just go from like your phone or a different connection, and we can feed you back into the. Yeah.
Yeah.
One second, folks. We're going to be working this. It'll just take me 1 second here. We'll figure out. Go ahead and talk. See, I can't hear you at all now. Can you choose a different mic input on your input setting on the StreamYard? When you come in the studio, you can choose your mic. Oh, okay. Sorry, folks. Live radio at its finest. We're working on it right now, and we'll see what we can get done for you guys. He's got a lot of really cool art to show, so I do apologize about the delay. He's going to try to do something else real quick, and if we can't get it going, we'll probably call it, and we'll just see you back here on a Paranormal Live here at 10 p.m. CST. But let me try one more thing, folks. Bear with me one more second. Sam.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It just wasn't so loud.
Yeah.
Say.
Now it's through the webcam microphone.
Oh, I see. I can hear you. So hold on 1 sec. I'm going to turn you up on my end. Go ahead and talk.
Hello.
Hey, hello, Mr. Sam Shearon.
Well, is my sound coming through?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to start from the very beginning.
Ha! Start over, guys. Just kidding. 1, 2, 3, and.
Of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win.
Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where we explore the strange and the unexplained. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, and thanks for joining me. Now, if you enjoy our content, please subscribe, like, and share our presentations. Please feel free to place a comment as well. Super Chat is active during the show, so please show your support for Phantoms and Monsters Radio by clicking the dollar icon underneath the chat. You can also support the channel by clicking the super thanks icon or buy me a coffee link or banner. Your consideration is very much appreciated. So tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Sam Shearon, who is a British dark artist who specializes in horror and science fiction. His work often includes elements inspired by vintage tales of monsters and madmen, dark figures, post-apocalyptic genres including superpunk and industrial wastelands and classic literature. Sam's main influence stems from ancient cultures, the occult, industrial art, revolution eras, the supernatural, the paranormal, cryptozoology, and the unexplained. Sam has created covers for comic books and graphic novels, as well as album sleeve artwork and merchandise, designs for some of the biggest names in rock, metal, and industrial music. Sam is also known for his cryptozoology art in form of book covers, prints, and magazines. And you can find and purchase Sam's artwork at MrSamShearon.com. So, Sam, thanks for joining me.
Good evening.
Aha. We got things fixed, I think.
Yeah.
This is our second take. So, hopefully, the second time's the charm.
Yeah, I see it's a little delayed on my end, but we are finally here doing it.
Great.
I don't know what was going on with the microphone there, but some kind of feedback. But we're here. It's good to finally meet you, Lon. It's been years. I've been following and listening to your various.
You know what? This is the first time that we've actually talked to each other.
It is.
And I have. You know what? When I first was introduced to your work, was seeing David Weatherly's book covers. And when I used to interview David, I used to comment on the artwork, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's Sam." So last year when you put out your Christmas cards, I had to get some because they were so great. And of course, I went and bought some more again this year, and also bought some prints. And as you can see behind me, we're kind of getting a collection of these things, and I love them. I mean, of course, you did the artwork for the Chicago Mothman creature, and those are great. And I had gotten the print from Seth Breedlove when the film came out, and then I ordered some things from you, and you were kind enough to send a few more. And the one I really like the most is the Edgar Allan Poe print, which I think is fantastic because I used to live near Baltimore for a long time, and of course we're all with the Ravens football team and the whole lore, and it's just great. So absolutely, I've been a fan for a long time.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and thanks for picking up the Christmas cards every year. It really means the world. That's awesome that you did that. I'm always tickled when I see your name in there, that you've made a little order. So by all means, more than happy to give you more prints as a thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. So Sam, let's start from the beginning. How did you get involved? How did you start wanting to do artwork? It must be something you started as a child, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's no sort of beginning. It's one of those questions that sort of pops up every so often and is always sort of rephrased in a certain way, but there's really no way to pinpoint a beginning of when I decided to. I don't think I decided to start artwork or get into artwork. As you say, it's more of an organic thing. Just getting older from childhood, you start to, you lay on your belly on the floor as a child watching television, and it's either Jason and the Argonauts, or it's Masters of the Universe, or dinosaur movies 1 million years BC, that kind of thing. Back in the day when there were only 4 channels on TV in England. So all of those kind of influences, Godzilla and anything to do with, even the Dark Crystal and the Muppet Show and that kind of stuff really got me interested in just monsters in general. But I think it was natural history, and growing up in England and visiting the museums in England really got me just absolutely enamored with monsters being real, because when you're sort of 6 or 7 years old and you're standing underneath a giant dinosaur skeleton in a museum and you realize that these things are real, then your imagination starts to go wild, and all of a sudden Godzilla on the TV isn't as interesting as real monsters.
Right.
And so I guess I just started to pursue that. I started reading and collecting books on the unexplained and far off flung regions of the world, which to me now aren't so far away. Talking about the redwoods and things like that, I finally, as a Brit, came over to California and Washington and Oregon. And the redwoods, when I was a child, may as well have been on another planet, but now I can visit them and look for real monsters. So It's just another step, another progression to illustrate them for books for people like David Weatherly and Ken Gerhard and others, So it's a real passion now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know you got quite a following, and it's just amazing. And and I tell you, I'm really enthralled and thrilled by the Christmas characters that you have done, and all the lore involved with that, and your interpretation of those characters it's amazing. And folks, I tell you, if you got to go to MrSamShearon.com and look at some of what Sam has to offer, because it's some really great stuff. And of course, I am waiting for my order to come, and it'll be, again, I guess, I don't even want to send them out, be honest with you. I want to keep them.
Well, it's funny, people do collect them. There's a number of people who always sort of buy a couple of packs because they want to keep them for themselves. Yeah. So that always tickles me,
So, as we talk, Vince is going to be posting some of the pictures you provided of your art and such. So as you have done this, and as you researched, I'm quite sure you've done a lot of research onto the characters that you've been involved, that you've drawn.
Mm-hmm.
How about, do you have any strange stories for us, and especially around the holidays? Has there anything that you really, that's really influenced your work? Some really creepy or strange stories that maybe none of us don't even know about.
Well, that's such a huge question. I've talked about this on a number of other podcasts with Micah Hanks and Sarai Ascath and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny, there's that kind of a mindset where people say that children are more open to stranger things, and I think the older you get, you do tend to become more closed off to things because you're more occupied with adult, responsibilities and things, and so you're not as nothing's new to you. So life seems to go quicker as well because everything's very familiar. But as a child, you're constantly learning, and you're so open to everything. I think we do notice things as kids more often. So most of the strange things that have happened to me did happen to me when I was, or I witnessed them when I was a child. And it's, now I'm 44 years old, and I still see the occasional UFO because I'm one of those people that will look for them. I'll, step outside and look at the sky waiting for a taxi or something. And so I'm one of the people that's not with my head down looking at my phone like most people. I'm the one looking in the sky. So I'll always catch something. But generally speaking, I mean, it's more. Where do I begin? Ghosts is something that's always fascinated me since childhood. And I had an experience when I was 7 of two, what can only be described as two small children walking into my bedroom, who I initially thought, this is going to sound really strange, I initially thought they were my aunt and uncle, stood in the doorway because they had come to visit. I'd been sent to bed early. I didn't want to go to bed. I'd actually stayed up till about 10, but, to me it was early. I was wide awake. I didn't want to go to bed. My aunt and uncle were visiting. And so in the house at the time, it was quite small. I could hear the television downstairs, so I was wide awake. And then I sort of turned over, and my aunt and uncle stood in the doorway, and I sat up because I was excited to sort of see them. They were leaving early. I wasn't going to be able to say goodbye in the morning, kind of thing. So I said, oh, it was great to see you. Thanks for the dinosaur book you gave me. Sleep well. I'll see you next time. And they didn't answer me. They just stood in the doorway. And that's when I realized that they were a lot shorter than they should have been. And they started to walk into the room. And when the light changed, because the whole light was on, so they were silhouetted, but when they went into the room, I could see it was a boy and a girl. And so I threw my pillow at them. I screamed the house down. And I just looked away. I didn't want to look at them. And so I looked up, and there was a green fireball. This just sounds absolutely ridiculous every time I tell this story, but it was a green soccer ball size ball of green fire.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going around the ceiling in every corner of the room. And every time I would look up at it, it would fly down at me, almost as though it was forcing me to look at the other children. Wow, speaking of creepy children, there are the neighbors. Poltergeists. Apologies if you can hear the noisy.
Oh, I don't hear anything.
And the dog. And so, yeah, this was just baffling to me. My mum ran upstairs. She stopped, grabbed me, dragged me out of the room, shut the door, and, nothing was sort of talked about after that, other than, the next day, my mum was saying, oh, you had a bad dream kind of thing, and I don't know what was going on. And it wasn't until a couple of years later when I brought it up, and my mum doesn't like anything to do with ghosts, and so she sort of just didn't want to talk about it. And I was badgering her why, and she said, okay, look, we're not going to talk about this again, but I'll say this. And she said, all I know is there was something going on in your room that I didn't understand, and I just knew I had to get you out of there. And to this day, she won't talk about it after that, past that,
Wow.
And shortly after, we moved house further north. But that really kicked off to me, aside from a number of other strange occurrences in that home, just the creepy vibe. I mean, we lived on the edge of a forest where hundreds of years prior, people were hung, and the town was called Murder Shore. I mean, it sort of speaks for itself. But there was certainly something strange going there. They found a stagnant pond in the forest that we were always warned as children to not go near, because it was like quicksand, the old Tarzan movies that you would see. This was a real fear. There was a bog that absolutely stank. And one year they drained it, and they found hundreds of skeletons of all kinds of pets and animals that had gone missing, and who knows what. So it was a strange town that I grew up in. But I left there when I was 10. So, yeah, I mean, that really kicked off my interest in the unexplained, because to me that happened, that was real, and I wanted to know what was going on. And to this day, I've not found, aside from green fireballs in the sky as UFOs, I've never found a ghost story that I can really match it with to explain what was going on. If it even was ghosts, I mean, I have no idea exactly what was happening, but it happened.
That's interesting. I guess you had a very wide imagination as a child. Yeah, I kind of think about it was a kind of a thought form thing that kind of popped up, or maybe it was a spirit of your aunt and uncle. I don't know. Maybe it was something you projected.
maybe I manifested it.
Yeah.
It was strange. I mean, I remember them wearing frilly clothes. I described at the time to my mom. Very detailed description, and my mum said at the time, there's no way you could have known what they would be wearing. Victorian clothes that you could maybe guess or describe it as knickerbockers and frilly clothing. Very strange, creepy. Perhaps I'll paint it one day. Get around to it.
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, I'd love to see that. Interesting.
Hopefully, it won't open the door again. Maybe.
Well, yeah.
Invite them back.
So, other than that, have you had any other experiences that that you can talk about?
I've seen a number of let's say strange insects, and that just sounds boring on face value. Strange insects, but
strange insects.
One of them was again in the same town. Me and a friend were walking along the edge of the forest, and again I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and we heard what sounded like buzzing. And I'm terrified of bees and wasps as it is, although I think this is probably where the fear may have come from. We saw what looked like a model airplane or a remote-controlled aircraft, one of those model kits that people fly, and it was just sort of hanging around the edge of the forest, maybe 100 yards away. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. Look at that airplane. And it was a little black and yellow striped thing flying around. Pretty noisy. And then we looked around to see who was on the ground flying it with a control, and there was no one around. And then it dipped down and started coming towards us. And that's when I realized it was a dragonfly. But it was about a foot long. I mean, it was absolutely huge and incredibly noisy. And so we just turned and ran. And I overtook my friend, left him for dust, and I don't think I ever saw him again. I just ran home. I just had to get away from it. And I mean, it was huge. It was a huge dragonfly. It wasn't a remote control plane, and it chased us for, I don't know, 500 yards till I got home, and then it sort of just petered off into the woods. But that was a strange one. The other one was seeing a grasshopper, a bright green grasshopper with a human face, like an old man's face.
Wow.
I mentioned this one recently because at first I thought it was a toy. And I was about to go to the shops with my mom, and I was already outside waiting for her. I think she'd gone back inside because she'd forgotten something. So I was outside waiting to leave, and I leant over this wall where we were living, and I looked over the edge of the wall into the sort of garden area, and I saw what I thought was a large green toy of a grasshopper. You can get these big plastic insects in most kids' toys places in the 80s especially. And I thought it was one of them. So I sort of leant over to almost grab it, and it turned its head on a swivel kind of thing, as they do, and looked up at me. It sort of arched its body and twisted its head around, and it had an old man's face. And so I just ran inside and said, Mom, come and look at this, quick. We went back outside, and of course it was gone. But eyes play tricks on you, and as you say, when you're a child, you see things differently, and things look larger when you're a child. There's all different ways you could possibly explain it, but it just stood out to me as really odd. I can't explain it.
Wow. I've never really talked about this, but when I was when I was growing up, I grew up in a really old house. I lived in a couple houses when I was a kid. But the one thing that I remember vividly is at night when I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I'd be laying there, and this large mass, dark mass, would form above me. Happened almost every night. It was huge, and I never knew what it was, and I never mentioned it to my parents. I had a lot of encounters when I was younger, but I never mentioned this huge mass, and I have never been able to figure it out. It actually eventually went away after I I don't know, got to the age of maybe 5 or 6.
Wow.
But then I had, of course, I had an encounter when I was, got a little older. I had a encounter in Gettysburg, and then I had a few other things. So maybe that was my intuitiveness that was picking up something. I don't know. That house was creepy anyway, and maybe something did manifest, but I just never really understood what it was.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe it knew that you'd be doing this as a career.
Well, who knows? I mean, I always knew something was going on, but I just never really figured it out until later on, after I had that encounter at Gettysburg. And as time went on, I was able to determine that I was sensing spirit energy. And of course, I've had these cryptid encounters, which I guess I feel lucky to have had. I don't think maybe I've gotten into this if I hadn't had them. But I had always been involved with the paranormal for a long time. Even in high school, I was doing investigations. That was back in the 70s, and people would look at you like you were nuts when you talked about it. I grew up in a very conservative area, so and of course, I never talked about it with my parents. So maybe I was destined. Maybe you were destined. So who knows?
Yeah, I just find it. I think some people get hooked into it because, and I can only relate to it is with the artwork kind of thing. Is I don't want to draw a bowl of fruit. I don't want to paint a picture of some bananas and apples in a bowl. Because to me, you see that every day. I'm more interested in the things that you don't see. But when you do see them, it's worth recording them and it's worth sharing that. And, we're not the only ones. These things do happen. Why, we don't know. But I think nature is so varied. There's such a spectrum of species on the planet that we can't possibly know everything in every area of existence in terms of whether something is on a higher plane of existence, whether super nature takes it to another level. I mean, if you look at a chameleon, a lizard that can transform its skin colors and textures by will, as can an octopus. Could you imagine the first people that discovered that? I mean,
absolutely.
That's pure magic happening. That's science fiction happening right in front of you. This animal is transforming, and particularly octopus, where they change shape. They become more, some of them can look like a spiky rock, and then they become smooth again. Some of them become transparent. So it makes me wonder, on the spectrum of nature and natural history, if you want to look at it from that angle, if there was ever a way to eventually record these things, are they just another extension of reality that we just haven't managed to catalog because they're so elusive?
Yeah. And me, I almost ask that question every day. I mean, I hear so many different things from so many different people. And every once in a while, invariably something pops up that I've never had any inkling of what people had ever seen before. And it keeps you on my toes, quite frankly. And then I got to try to explain it to people and try to write up about it. It can be a chore sometimes. So Mothman 46 has asked the question, what scares Sam?
What scares me? Time. Time scares me.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier I'm 44 and I did some really depressing math, or mathematics, or maths as we say in the UK. A little while back, I tried to work out how much time me as an artist has on this earth that would be functional to, create, and how much time you have left. And it's the worst thing you can do. But I figured out that if I was one of the lucky ones to live to around 80, and that's a big if, then I've got about 2,000 weeks left. That's it. And when you think 2,000 weeks, or even worse, 40 or less, 36 summers left. That's it.
Yeah.
It really becomes frightening. So I think the scariest thing to me is time. But
You know,
in
that's
terms of the
interesting.
supernatural and the paranormal things that scare me on that level, I think the idea of, as with anything, not knowing what's going on is terrifying. If I'm in a room alone, which has happened in my apartment in Hollywood, I was just taking a quick nap on the couch for 5 minutes before a rider was due to pick me up. And somebody shouted in my ear, "Hey!" And I opened my eyes because I thought maybe I'd left my door open and my friend had snuck in. But there was no one there. And it was as clear as day. And that kind of thing scares me because there's no control over it. There's no answer. It is the unknown. Is this going to harm me in some way? Am I in danger? What's going on? Is this even a human once upon a time, or is this something that was never human that's learned the English language? I don't know. That's terrifying to me. I've had sleep paralysis twice, only in the last 2 years, for the first time ever. I never thought I would. I always used to think that that's something that just happens to other people, and I had no idea what it was like. You can imagine. You hear so many stories about it, but I literally couldn't move and I couldn't breathe. And a dark figure that looked like a solid black, hooded, ripped clothing, kind of almost like a witch. If you want to imagine that, it's just a mass of darkness. The figure just came rushing in the room from the doorway, down the side of the wall towards the bed, and as it got to me, it just kind of dissipated, and I could breathe and I could sit up again. And that's happened twice, and it was the exact same thing again, which makes me wonder if it's a medical thing, if it's your brain creating this situation. I don't know, but it happened here in Los Angeles, and it happened at my parents' house. Which makes me think it's a physical thing, because why would that same entity, who knows, but why would it follow me from LA to the UK? That's one hell of a coincidence, unless they can just come in and out of wherever you are. Who knows? But that was terrifying, because I'd never experienced it. I never thought I would. As I say, I thought, that's just something that happens to other people. But sure enough, absolute terror. This thing rushing in the room. I could see it. I was wide awake, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And as it approached me, and we're talking in less than 2 seconds was the time it took to enter the room and travel down the side of the bed. So 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, that was it.
Wow.
But it was terrifying. Just that's what scares me. Things you have no control over, that are unexplained.
I get that. You mentioned 2 things that make me think a lot is time. And, we've all got a finite number of years on this, being mortal beings.
Whatever the fates allow.
Yeah. And you wonder when my time is up. I mean, when's that going to happen? But also the biggest thing is that you have no control over it. Yeah. And, if you are someone who's had experiences like you and myself and others, in most instances, you have no control over what you're sensing or what you're seeing. And to me, that is the scariest thing. I can go into an investigation, or I can, when I'm really focusing on it, and then when I have seen something or have experienced something, the fear is not there at the time. But boy, I'm telling you, when I reflect back on it, that is when I get scared.
Yeah. I remember I visited a number of haunted houses. Funnily enough, in January, I went to the Golden Fleece in York, city of York in the UK. And it's supposed to be the most haunted pub in England, but of course they all say that, don't they?
Yeah, sure.
But this was featured on Most Haunted, the TV show. Take that with a pinch of salt, whichever you like. it has all kinds of recorded things happening in this place. But nothing had happened there. But what had happened to me in a place in the city of, just outside the city of Preston in the UK, in the northwest, is a house that's, I think it's over 700 years old, and it's called Chingle Hall. Well, that just sounds haunted, doesn't it? Chingle.
Mm-hmm.
And it had changed hands, over centuries. At one point, they used to hide monks inside the walls so that the Roman soldiers didn't come in and murder them. Just conflicting religions and things like that. And another time, it was a children's orphanage, and so on and so forth. And so this place is just riddled with all kinds of treachery and awful, sad stories. And there's supposed to be a head buried in a wall somewhere. And I've been there 3 times. I've stayed over there twice. But this is maybe 15 years ago. I went and stayed with 7 friends. And the owners sort of gave you the tour at the beginning. And then they say, okay, well, I'll see you at dawn, good luck. And we just generally sort of sit around in one room. We made a pact together that we would all stay in the same room. And if we were going to move somewhere, then we would all move together. We wouldn't be all wandering around everywhere, like they do on these TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would set up video cameras on tripods in one room, and then we would all go and sit in a different room. And we would rotate until we went through every room in the house for the whole night. And on the top floor, there's only really 2 rooms. It's such a small building, but the stairs go up to a corridor. And the first room is at the top of the stairs, and the second is down the corridor. And that's a dead end, essentially. There's no way you can get past it. Mm-hmm. So we had all spent an hour in there, and it was the room where the most violent ghost is supposed to be there. People have been shoved, pushed, poked, scratched, all of the tropes. You're not supposed to shut the door because there was a fire in there, and it's supposed to anger one of the ghosts. So, of course, we shut the door, and we locked it, and we all sat in there for an hour. Nothing happened. And then we decided, okay, well, then let's go and sit in the other room. And I had been sat in an armchair in the corner. And this corner of the room is maybe 10, 15 feet from the doorway. And it's a wood floor. So we'd left that room and we went to the second room, and we spent another hour in that room. Now, I was the last person to leave their first room and the first one out of the second room. And when we'd spent that second hour in the second room, I came out, and the armchair I had previously been sat in was now in the doorway facing the corridor. And there is absolutely no way anybody else was in the house. Nobody had left the room that I was in because I was the last one in there. So they would have had to have walked past me to leave. Nobody came upstairs and went past me down the corridor. This big leather wooden armchair had somehow silently moved from the corner 10 or 15 feet across the wood floor in this tiny little house right next room to us, and had placed itself in the doorway now facing the corridor. And when you talk about getting a shiver of not understanding what's happening, there was no crying children, there was no moaning voices or rattling chains, there was nothing screaming, there was no violence. It was just this chair was there, almost as if to say, look what we can do. Mm-hmm. And it was terrifying to see that and not be able to understand it. Wow. I think that's one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced. Because again, it was also one of those chairs that it would take 2 people to lift. It wasn't just like a little wooden chair. It was a big leather armchair in the corner of the room that had somehow silently moved by itself. And it wasn't as though I had moved it when I got out of the chair and not realized. It had traveled and changed its position into the doorway. We had to put it back. That's how far it had moved. So that was very strange.
It is. Nancy Malcolm mentioned something in the chat, and I'm kind of interested in what your thoughts are. That people who are creative live between worlds. Do you believe that to be true?
Live between worlds. I suppose I would ask what they mean by between worlds. I think anyone with a decent imagination can spin their own little world before they go to sleep, and often it helps me to sleep if I start to drift off into a world of my own. But
I'm exactly the same way. Exactly the same way.
Yeah, and it could be anything I can think of. I like to write a lot of stories and plan short films in my head, kind of thing. But in terms of having a foot into the other side or the beyond or what's beyond death, I would guess maybe a number of mediums would claim that they can talk to the dead or they hear the dead. I'm not someone that really can swallow that too often. I believe some people may very well hear voices and be in tune to it, but I think 99% of those people are just, I hate to say it, fooling themselves more than anyone else. It's wishful thinking. Wishful thinking,
I have the one thing I do experience occasionally being an intuitive is it seems I'm constantly being bombarded by energies. And when I say that, I'm like, that period of time when you're laying down or getting ready to sleep between the time you are awake and the time you fall asleep, there's a certain something changes. I don't know if it's the mental chemistry or your brain chemistry or something, but I start to see in my mind's eye and start hearing, occasionally hearing of people looking through a window at me and trying to communicate with me.
Yeah, see, now that's terrifying.
Yeah, and it happens to me. It's happened to me most of my life, but more so in later years. Maybe the past 20 years or so. And it's, I'll be laying, and it doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally when I'll be laying there, sitting there, getting ready to drift off, I see this like window or this opening or something coming, and I see a head coming from the edge, like something or someone is trying to get my attention. Sometimes I think I hear something.
Yeah.
But for the most part, most of the time it's the face of someone who's looking at me. You can see them mouthing, but you can't always hear them. And the best that I can do is kind of be like an empath and try to understand what they're trying to communicate with me. That happens to me occasionally. And I have talked to mediums and other intuitives about that. And it seems a lot of them had the same thing happen to me,
Yeah.
I call it being a beacon, a spirit beacon, and that they try to contact you because, they want you to recognize that they're there. I don't know. I mean, whatever the reason. I mean, I guess that's what a haunting really is.
Yeah,
on Earthbound, trying to get verification that they maybe you can see them.
See, that's what interests me is the people who really are having those experiences and who are in tune. And I believe there are people who can feel and see and hear these things. And I think those people are not the people that go on television. I think those are not the people that make a career out of it. I think most of those people are entertainers, for want of cruel words that you could say. But I do believe there are a number of people who absolutely hear and see things on a daily basis. And I would imagine it's quite tormenting and quite worrying, because who do you tell without sounding crazy? Who do you tell without somebody saying, oh, they hear voices, they must have a mental issue? Because, of course, that's also a very real thing. So it can be I would assume, frightening to hear that on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever's happening, whether and everything in life is a frequency, isn't it? So if there's a vibration where in the next realm after we've died, wherever we go, wherever that energy is, I wonder if it's not people getting trapped here, but if there's a thinning of the veil, or if there's some kind of a frequency that in the right circumstances you can see back, perhaps throughout time, because again, time is terrifying because it goes in every direction. It's not linear. It's all
Right.
around us. Everything's happening all at once, and that's terrifying. You can think back to your childhood in a second, and you're there. That happened. To know what's going to come next or when you're going to die, particularly if you're hearing a lot of voices towards the end. I know I was in a hospital maybe 20 years ago now, but there was an old man who had a private room next to the ward I was in, and he would call for the nurse at night, and he'd be at first angry, but then he'd get upset, and then he'd be terrified. He sounded as though he was terrified, and he would always say that there were people at the window asking him to go with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the nurses would call security. They would do the rounds. They'd go outside. They'd check the windows. There was nobody there. And this happened 3 nights in a row. And this was a very elderly man. He had to be in his 90s, very sick. He was that scared. He would somehow manage to get out of bed and get to the edge of the bed and be calling for people for help, saying that these people were at the window, and you could hear him shouting back at them. And I would occasionally, have to be thinking, should I call the nurse? This happened 3 nights in a row to the extreme where he had gotten out of bed, and then he died.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, was he being called? Was he not ready? Did he not want to go? Who were they? That's terrifying, especially if you're just not ready and you don't want to. But also if you're elderly and you don't know what's going on and you don't understand, I'm sure that could be frightening as well.
I've had an occasion to be with several people on their deathbed, relatives, friends, and such. And if they weren't in a coma or they weren't unconscious and were somewhat lucid, every one of them is talking to something.
Yeah. My grandmother.
Your grandmother?
Yeah. Towards the end, she passed away fairly recently, a couple of years ago. And towards the end, me and my mum will be in the kitchen, and we had a sort of a baby monitor so that we could listen to make sure she was okay. And you would hear her jabbering away, talking to somebody, and it was quite spooky. She unfortunately had dementia, and that's a very rapid end. It's quite sad, but it makes you wonder who she was talking to. Were they just memories coming in from her childhood? She was mentioning children at school and that kind of thing, and so that's the confusion setting in. But then at night you would hear her, and you'd think, who is she talking to?
Mm-hmm.
And me and my mum were in the kitchen, and we would listen, as I say, at night. We'd have a cup of tea or something at night, and we would listen to the baby monitor. And it was always a sort of, we'd almost half joke to each other, and we'd say, I really hope we don't hear somebody else answer.
Well, that would be another level.
Yeah, that we were always sort of, like, this is different, but it would be worse if we actually heard a different voice. And we would listen. We would listen hard. But luckily, thankfully, we never did hear anybody. So who knows?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, because I've had that experience several times with people who I've been near before they passed. And
it's sad.
It always seems to happen. It really does. And I even mentioned it to my wife, who passed away about 7 years ago now. And, Yeah, she was sitting there listening as well as and I never really figured out what it was, but they would say some of the things, and you kind of listen to it, and you think they are definitely seeing or sensing something, and they're talking to somebody.
Yeah.
It is spooky.
Yeah.
Since Vincent's got the Christmas cards up there, Mothman asked, "What is Sam's favorite Christmas tradition?"
Wow, that is a good question. What a great question. My favorite Christmas tradition. Honestly, there's so many. A friend of mine, I would always, I think for the last 20 plus years, I spend New Year's Eve at one of my friends' house, and it used to be at their parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a tradition where their dad would always give me a lump of coal and some coins and some other things, wrapped up in a cloth. And I would always be told to sort of go out the back and walk around the building and knock on the front door, and they would let me back in, so that I was the first person of the new year to enter the house, bringing good luck and good charm. And that was always really an honor to be asked to do that every year. And I've known these people since I was 10 years old, so 34 years I've known them, and I did that for the last 20 years. They've asked me to bring in the coal for the new year, so that's a favorite tradition. But I think just being with friends and family in general is the greatest tradition that I always look forward to, and I treasure it because not everybody has that. And I think it's really important as a tradition to make sure that you reach out to as many people as you possibly can, whether they're with people or not, to just make sure that people remember they're not alone. Because even if you're on your own, you're never alone. And I think that's a tradition that should really be reinforced and reminded, especially at the darkest time of the year.
Wow. The one Christmas tradition, and I don't celebrate it, but it's from my family. My family was from Switzerland.
Wow.
And with the Krampus tradition.
I've been there twice.
Have you? I have never been there. I would love to go there. But the several different countries in Europe celebrate different things. But the Krampus thing, and then with the Zwarte Piet and the Black Pete thing, and I wrote about it not long ago. That whole thing, I don't necessarily understand it and why it was ever part of a tradition related to Christmas, but it's something I never grew up with, but I found out about later on, and it's bizarre. But I see that you have actually done some Krampus drawings, interpretations, and Sinterklaas, and the different interpretations of Santa Claus. I don't know if you've done a Black Pete, but that whole thing, I don't know. I don't know what to think about it, but it fascinates me.
Yeah, it's a funny one because I don't think people realize just how much Christmas has been taken and reworked from the what you could call the heathens. Now, people would say that heathen is an insulting word, but it's in some circles it's a preferred term, and the word pagan is in fact the insult, because it would be the Christians who would refer to the wilder people, or the traditional pagans, or what they would prefer to be called the heathens that lived on the heath and the mountains and the forests and worshipped the nature gods, the original people of England and Europe and the northern regions. And so when Christians came in order to win over these, tribes and convert them to Christianity, what they would do is they would steal some of these characters and turn them into saints. And so you have a lot of animal, man, gods, deities, and various spirits that Christianity would deem as demons, or they would paint their own demons in the characteristics of a heathen god, so that people would then say, oh, well, that's evil, when really it wasn't at all. It was completely the opposite. You have sun worshippers and winter worshippers, and a lot of the old traditions were warnings for people to, again, look after each other in the darkest time of the year. There was always a tradition to sort of make sure that the children had enough clothes, or that they didn't wander off into the woods, otherwise a giant hairy monster would get them. And back in those days, there really were giant hairy monsters. There were bears and wolves all over Europe and England. There's fossilized remains of giant polar bears in London. You go back far enough to the tribes way before the Roman Empire, and there were people who lived alongside monsters. And so you had to really create these deities and these gods to protect people. And unfortunately, over the centuries, as Christianity spread throughout Europe, again, they adopted and stole a lot of these characters and twisted them. And Saint Nicholas, who has various origins, has Krampus, the Great Claw, the son of Hel, the Norwegian god, is his companion to punish all the naughty children. And it became a Christian tradition, still practiced today across various parts of Europe.
Yeah.
Now it's become popular in America. There's all kinds of groups doing it as well.
Absolutely.
I've been in a parade and I've been beaten by a switch, and it's painful.
I think I go back to Chad Lewis. He sends me a Christmas card every year, and it's got something to do with Krampus every time. He's really into the Krampus thing. So it is. Yeah. I'm obsessed with British history. I really am. It's something that has fascinated for a long time. But when you start going back into it, you go, even back as far as the pre-Roman era, with the Picts and such, and you start to see the formation of a lot of the lore, here in the United States, our history our relative history is no more than 400 or 500 years old. But when you go back and look at British history or European history, it's like there's just so much there. And that's what fascinates me, that something always pops up that I get involved with, and I want to look into it further. And there seems to be some relativity between what has happened back then and a lot of things that happen now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you look at how things have evolved, and as I say, it's becoming more and more popular in North America, and in this modern age, the revival of the old religions, and not so much a religious sense of worship, but a fascination with different characters and creatures and styles and behaviors and the real old fantasy world. Because if you think of things like Lord of the Rings, all of a sudden you can make that real. You can live it and become part of a fantasy world with monsters, as we used to do, or 100% for real. And Santa Claus himself, I mean, really, he was only invented 200 years ago. It's not very long ago. It's a couple of generations ago. There was no Santa Claus. It didn't exist. And now we have about 50 different versions of him that are major ones, and many, many more that are sort of slight variations. You mentioned Sinterklaas and Zwart Piet out over in Holland. You have Dead Moroz in Russia, who's a blue Santa, There's so many different versions of them. And some refer to them as the Terror Men, where they would, a bell snipper would throw nuts down onto the ground and sweets and candy. And if any children sort of dived onto the ground to grab them, he'd beat them for being greedy. You know, it was almost like a trick. So you suddenly learned to behave back then. It's a shame that they don't do that these days.
Well, yeah. I got one last question for you. What is your favorite cryptid?
There's the question. Wow. I think one of the most fascinating ones, which is such a mixed bag of what the hell's going on. I mean, I could probably list about 10 different cryptids. You know, I have a long list of, I think it's around close to 600 different, you know, unknown monsters, animals, whatever you want to term cryptid as these days, that I'm working on as an artist to eventually put a book together. So it's hard to pick one, but I think the Jersey Devil is the most interesting because it comes from a place of sideshow, trickery, and lies, scams, and also folklore, witchcraft, stigma, all these kind of things that are thrown around to blame.
It's kind of got it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just a mixed creature, and there's so many different descriptions of what it looks like. Even today, people describe seeing it. But I think, you know, I love the lizard man. That's another one that's strange. Is it a Bigfoot wearing an alligator suit, or is it a human type reptile dinosaur? Is it an alien? Who knows? I think it's fascinating that we have this whole spectrum of the word cryptid has evolved as well, where it's not so much the Bernard Heuvelmann's version, which was originally just the study of unknown animals or undiscovered, unclassified animal species. Now, the term cryptid seems to be a catch-all for anything that's unknown, anything that's a monster that's strange and weird, which includes humanoids, is now suddenly under the umbrella term of cryptid, which some people don't like. And I used to be kind of a traditionalist where I prefer it to be about animals, but now you have to sort of really open it up because it's just, you know, the cat's out of the bag and the horses are bolted, and cryptid is just a term used for everything now. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is a fairly new term. I mean, it's something that I've really only used in about the past decade or so. Yeah, I probably use it more than I need to use it, but I do use it. And it encompasses a lot of different things, you know, like you said, humanoids. Well, that falls under cryptid. I mean, you don't necessarily want to say it's a cryptid, but, you know, what is a cryptid? I mean, it's just something that science hasn't recognized. And, of course, everything we deal with is probably a cryptid because we deal with so many things that so many people just don't feel are real. But, of course, some of us have had encounters and have had experiences that, you know, make what we do seem relative.
Absolutely. Well put.
So, go ahead.
Well said.
Oh, thank you. So, Sam, before we go, I'd like for you to tell the folks how they can get a hold of you, go to your website, what you got coming up, and you always are working on something. And I suggest people go to your YouTube site and watch you create some of your work live or, you know, in real time. It's fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, you can find all of the links to my store, all the social media links, Twitter, Instagram. Come and say hello. Facebook's there, of course, and YouTube, yes. And I have a Patreon as well, where I'll draw live every Wednesday. And you can just sort of hang out and chat while I ramble on about nonsense and draw monsters. So that's always good to come and hang out. And that's 4 times a month I'll do that, if not more. So yeah, MrSamShearon.com, Mr. as in MASTER, Sam Shearon, SHEARON.com. And we'll find everything there. So yeah, come and say hello.
Well, Sam, thanks for coming on. I've always been fascinated with what you do. Your interpretations just, it's great. I mean, I love it. So I will be putting more up on the walls. I'm starting to get a gallery now. So you take care, and I'm quite sure we're going to have you back on soon.
That'll be great. Have a great Christmas, winter season, whatever you celebrate. And everybody look after each other. and reach out to people, even if you've fallen out with them. Say hello.
You have a great weekend.
Take care.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a sighting or encounter report that you would like to be considered for personal reports show, or even on the Phantoms and Monsters blog, feel free to forward to my email at lonstrickler@phantomsandmonsters.com. I want to again thank Sam Shearon, Mr. Sam Shearon, for joining me this evening. And thanks to each and all of you for watching and chatting. We always have a great group here in the chat. So if you ever watch the show live, please consider coming onto the chat. We have a great bunch of people that come on there. So I guess next Wednesday, I'm going to try to do a live personal reports. And then Friday, we're going to have an alien abduction show, a roundtable. And that should be quite interesting. I don't know if we have people fully booked yet, but that's what the subject is going to be. And make sure you stay tuned for Bernadette McDaniel's A Paranormal Life, which her guest is going to be me. So that's at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 8 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time. And of course, next Wednesday night, Vincent Richardson's V show. We just had the premiere this past Wednesday. He'll be on there again. I don't know who his guest is. I think I do know, but I think it's Thomas Ferriaro, possibly. But anyway, we'll have that up. We'll have all the information up, and I'll be posting it up on the blog, and I'll be posting on Facebook and other places. So until then, stay healthy and have a safe, enjoyable weekend. Good night.